Senator David Senjem has introduced the Clean Energy First Act, a bill intended to stimulate a conversation among lawmakers about the state's energy future. He joins me now to talk more about it. Thanks for being here.
It's good to be here.
As you said in committee, this bill, the Clean Energy First Act, is, quote, motivational, a 25 to 30-year bill. What is your goal? What are you trying to accomplish?
Well, I think I recognize, and I think a good number of people in our society now recognize that the future of energy is changing. And to not recognize that, I think, frankly, would be wrong and be a mistake on behalf of our state, our country, perhaps our world. So it is changing. So then how do we make a change? And so the goal of this bill is to move through this change in a methodical way, an intelligent way, understanding where we are and how we might get there, but not necessarily putting it on the back of a bumper sticker or something like that. It's to use a studied approach to clean energy and moving clean energy forward, in this case in Minnesota.
Are you finding open-mindedness about this topic among your colleagues?
I think so, more and more, even since the advent of this bill. I think we're able to talk about this with good reason and good discussion amongst colleagues and so on and so forth. I think there's a recognition that yes, times are changing and we need to change with it.
At the federal level, the Democrats are talking about their Green New Deal. At the state level, Governor Walz has issued a plan to have the state using 100% clean energy by 2050. To what degree has this issue been politicized, and how do we find common ground so that we're moving forward in a way that's best for all of Minnesotans and Americans?
Well, the aspirational goal for clean energy is fine. I can live with that. You can pick your numbers, whatever you want to be. The political part of this is the whole discussion of climate change and whether you get into that or not. And I choose not to because it's not productive. Too much resistance. You can't go down this path if you're going to be interrupted with the whole discussion of climate change and whether that's real or not. So let's just base it on the fact that technology and the economy are going to take us into a new energy future, and that's going to be built around renewables.
As I scanned the bill, there were phrases like local benefits, local workers, local job creation, and community development that sort of jumped out, catchphrases. In what ways does implementing alternative energy technology help our economy?
Well, I'll just go back a half a step, and that's to say that over the next maybe 20, 25 years, a good number, in fact, probably most of our power plants in Minnesota are going to be closing. They're just wore out. And so recognizing that, and this bill does, what are we going to do? How are we going to approach that? And as these plants wear out and new technology emerges, we're going to have a lot of workers left on the side unless we have some form of picking them up, so to speak, and letting them continue as good parts of our society, tax-paying citizens, and so on and so forth. So the bill does call for dealing with that transition, that human transition into other careers.
So as the energy future changes, the ramifications, making sure that local economies are
yes.
taken
By the
care
way,
of.
it affects a lot of cities. These are, in many cases, major power plants in relatively smaller cities, so to speak, and that tax base is just vital for them. So we've got to make that transition for them, and as well as we can.
Well, and speaking of transition then, in committee, you referenced off-ramps for utilities to use in planning how they'll move forward. And my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that means that you're allowing the industry or the utilities to make the choices that best suit them, rather than prescribing, the state saying this is how you shall do it. Instead, you're letting them make their best argument. Do I understand that right?
Not quite. What this bill is all about is the utilities go through a resource planning process. They bring that process to the Public Utilities Commission. And that process is all about, as they are going to retire facilities or as they're going to need additional energy, how do they approach it? And this bill says you must consider renewable or clean energy first. There are different forms, hydro, et cetera, wind, solar, and so on. But you must consider clean energy first. Then, at that point, if, in fact, for reasons of affordability, reliability, distribution, a whole number of things, that's not feasible in that particular instance, the Public Utilities Commission can grant them an exception and move a slightly different direction. But it does emphasize that the future of energy in Minnesota is clean energy.
Do utilities need incentives or goals in order to meet this, or is there just an inevitability factor?
I think most utilities, XL being a prime example right here in Minnesota, are recognizing that this is the future. I'm not sure that they needed to be incented anymore to do that. XL, what is 85% or so by 2050. That's a giant step, and they took it on their own. So I think more and more utilities are going to recognize the future and step out and address that future on their own volition.
The Senate Energy Committee recently spoke once again about lifting the moratorium on nuclear power plants. And you just mentioned XL Energy. Their CEO, Ben Fowke, said that losing nuclear, he wants to keep Prairie Island and Monticello open. Losing it would be taking a step back towards their carbon-free future. Do we need to keep talking about nuclear power?
Well, I think so. And by the way, we don't, in this bill, we don't suggest that nuclear power should go away in this bill. There's going to be other bills, I suspect, by other authors that do that. And come 2030 and 2033, both of those sites are in Minnesota, Prairie Island and Monticello are up for re-permitting. And the legislature, whoever they are in those days, will decide whether or not that's going to be granted. So I think that's up in the air, but for now, at least with respect to this bill, nuclear power is clean power, just not unlike wind, solar, et cetera, and we're not going to touch it.
Senator Senjem, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.